Since our last board meeting, the economic and fiscal policy changes being advanced at the federal level of government have moved into sharper focus. And those changes present both challenges and opportunities for Puerto Rico. We are working with the administration of Governor Jennifer Gonzalez Colon and the Legislative Assembly to prepare Puerto Rico for both. We must plan for the changes in fiscal policy that we know are coming, and we must prepare for those that could still be ahead, but are largely unknown. We must also be ready to take advantage of President Trump's goal to bring manufacturing back to the United States from abroad. And Puerto Rico could well benefit from those trade and economic policy changes. Like every government around the nation, state, municipal, and others, less federal funding will be available to Puerto Rico in the coming years, in part because emergency stimulus funding related to the COVID-19 pandemic era are and always were expiring. This much we know. This year's budget and future budgets must reflect this reality. In addition, we must be prepared for additional budget and policy changes in Washington that impact recurring federal funds that the Commonwealth government, like many states and territories, have depended on to fund government services. We are in the process of working with the governor to finalize a responsible budget to submit to the legislature that meets the needs of the people of Puerto Rico. However, since the federal government is still in the process of shaping the federal government's own budget, we must be ready, and this budget is being prepared for an unusual degree of uncertainty. To provide you with some context on our budget development outlook, today our Budget Management Director, Elisa Guardiola, will provide you with an overview of how much of the Commonwealth's budget has relied on federal funding in recent years, and what departments receive a substantial share of their revenue from the federal government. The federal government's decisions to reduce financial support to the states and territories could have a substantial effect on Puerto Rico's Department of Education, for example. Particularly, the loss of elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, ESSER funding, is meaningful. This program was introduced in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, provided funding to states and local educational agencies to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on schools, and was to expire last year. But an extension was granted to Puerto Rico and other states. The federal government recently withdrew these extensions, but we understand that Puerto Rico is working on securing them for longer periods of time. Other states are affected too, from Massachusetts to California, from New York to New Mexico. And whereas Massachusetts is expected to lose $106 million in unspent COVID funding, according to the governor of Massachusetts, more than $500 million is at stake for the Puerto Rico Department of Education. Even if we can keep access to those federal funds longer, we know that these funds and others were always one-time, non-recurring aid. They were never meant to be permanent, and the Puerto Rico Department of Education must have a plan to operate with only recurring funds. Billions in Medicaid funds will also expire in 2027. And we will probably not know for a long time whether Congress would be willing to expand additional Medicaid coverage from the approximately $500 million statutory Medicaid funding that Puerto Rico receives by law. And if so, by how much? We need to be prepared to work with the governor to make sure that the federal government understands the implications for Puerto Rico. We continue to analyze funding for other departments and programs. Puerto Rico has more at stake than most states, given its relatively low median income compared to other states. The reliance on federal funds to support vital public services is more impactful. As a result of the non-recurring disaster relief and COVID-related aid, Puerto Rico is at the top end of U.S. states and territories with the highest share of federal funds as a proportion of its total budget. In the current fiscal year 2025, approximately 50% of the Commonwealth's budget was comprised of federal funds. However, when you remove the non-recurring aid, the Puerto Rico proportion of federal aid drops closer to the average of U.S. states, which is approximately 35%. We sent the government of Puerto Rico several letters in recent weeks to get more information and to understand to what degree the government is planning for the reductions. On March 6th, we asked the Secretary of Education for a breakdown of activities financed with non-recurring federal funds through the end of this and the following 5 fiscal years. The assumptions the projections are based on and an outline of the potential implications if alternative funding is not secured. We are working with the Puerto Rico Department of Education to analyze the implications of this information. In our response to the government's proposed budget for the coming fiscal year 2026, we highlighted the economic and fiscal uncertainty and the importance of a clear strategy to prioritize which programs and services are most critical. Given the government's reliance on federal funding and the uncertainty, it may be necessary to revisit overall spending levels and resource allocations before or even after the certification of the fiscal year 2026 budget, once there is greater clarity from the federal government. It is clear already that it is not possible to replace the federal funds that expire or could potentially be lost. It is imperative for the government to develop a comprehensive roadmap to transition Puerto Rico towards long-term fiscal responsibility, including financial sustainability, and we are committed to working with the government to develop such a strategy and to address the challenges ahead. And that is why we asked the government to do in our letter last week. Planning ahead is particularly important since the uncertainty around reduced federal funding is coming at a time when the government, the governor, the legislature, and the Oversight Board must prepare the budget for the coming fiscal year 2026, which starts on July 1. We are working very closely with the governor and our staff and communicating daily on these issues. The governor has provided the Oversight Board with a timely revised budget, and we are in the process of reviewing this revised proposal. We are planning to send the budget to the legislature next week, and as always, since the Oversight Board has been in place, Puerto Rico will have a certified budget in full compliance with the fiscal plan no later than June 30. The Commonwealth budget has 3 parts: general fund for day-to-day operations, special revenue funds for dedicated purposes, and federal funds. This year, 2026 general fund budget target has been set at $13.3 billion, reflecting a 1.5% increase over the current fiscal year, 2025 certified budget, primarily to account for inflation. Additional general fund resources in fiscal year 2026 budget have been largely allocated to non-recurring investments rather than recurring obligations in order to maintain fiscal responsibility in this era of uncertainty. The Oversight Board remains committed to fiscal discipline while preserving flexibility to respond to changing economic conditions and policy developments. Medicaid funding, as I mentioned before, remains one of the most significant long-term risks, but additional risks include broader economic challenges, the fragility of the power grid, inflation, and the importance of maintaining fiscal discipline in a post-restructuring environment. The fiscal year 2026 budget will reflect a measured, responsible approach in an environment of competing priorities, uncertainty, and persistent risk. We continue to see cooling economic growth in Puerto Rico. The outlook of the current and coming fiscal year reflect relatively flat growth compared to prior fiscal years. The updated forecast reflects more recent economic conditions and a more current view of the macroeconomic outlook. To gain more perspective on where the economy is heading, the Oversight Board will be hosting an economic symposium later this month with economists from the mainland and from Puerto Rico, so the government and the public can hear about individual outlooks and perspectives for the U.S. economy as a whole and the Puerto Rico economy specifically. The legislature has kindly agreed to host this public symposium at the Capitolio, and we hope this economic forecasting conference is going to become an annual feature and a fixed element of Puerto Rico's budget process. It will add transparency to the forecasting process, but also a robust exchange of ideas and points of view. Economic and fiscal uncertainty aside, Puerto Rico must be ready for the opportunities. The president's stated goal is to bring manufacturing back to the United States that companies, for various reasons, might have shifted abroad. Pharmaceutical and medical device manufacturing has been the backbone of Puerto Rico's economy, and that offers a unique advantage in the current debate about reshoring. Manufacturing in Puerto Rico is not as strong as it used to be, but the same is true for many different reasons for many parts of the United States and indeed throughout the developing world. But Puerto Rico has muscle. We have a university system that trains excellent engineers, and we have a pharma and device manufacturing companies that continue to produce world-class products here in Puerto Rico. We have brownfield fields that can be turned into sites for active manufacturing, and based on my conversations with the governor and her administration, I believe we have a government committed to using these tools and seizing the opportunities. The members of the Oversight Board are helping to advance these strategic opportunities, and the fiscal plan has long laid out parameters for Puerto Rico's success in a hyper-competitive world. One key element is tax reform. Puerto Rico must simplify its overly complex tax system. The tax system must become more fair and more efficient and more geared towards stimulating economic growth. The Oversight Board members have engaged in tax reform, and our staff is working with the government on a roadmap for tax reforms. Puerto Rico must reform its education system. Puerto Rico's children deserve a public school system that adequately prepares them for the job markets of the future. We raised teachers' salaries by almost 40% in recent years, and our civil service reform is transforming the administrative backbone of the school system at PRDE. But clearly more needs to be done. We are still at the beginning of the transformation that is needed to gear up the school system to meet the needs of today and tomorrow. And of course, Puerto Rico needs more reliable energy. But for the economic growth to improve and the quality of life for everyone who lives here. We continue on our path to end PREPA's bankruptcy, despite significant resistance from bondholders who have not agreed to support our plan of adjustment. And we continue to work with all the stakeholders of Puerto Rico's energy grid to speed up the recovery and resilience of PREPA's grid and power plants. Once again, it is imperative that we spend the FEMA funds already obligated, already allocated to Puerto Rico to restore and improve the grid as fast as possible. Last year, less than $4 billion of the $17 billion that has been made available to assist in repairing the grid after Maria has been spent. This is not acceptable, and together we must do better. On the debt side, we filed an amended plan of adjustment in March that reflects the projections and findings of the new PREPA fiscal plan that the Oversight Board certified in February. The amended plan eliminates the legacy charge contemplated in previous versions of the plan to replay the significantly reduced debt. And we will be working with the government to identify the source of funds to support the potential cash or bond recovery for creditors proposed in the plan.